Hello everyone, welcome to a new tutorial. This is part 2 of my new tutorial series about Blender for complete beginners. And we will step through the process and I'm going to show you how we can create a Hornet model from scratch. This is the part 2. Once again, this is part 2 of the series. So there will be some progress that we have made before and some changes to the default settings. But overall, there's nothing dramatic, since in the last episode we only learned about the essentials. If you are a complete beginner here, I recommended watching the part 1 first and can continue with the part 2. Without further ado, let's get started. Okay, first, in the previous episode we have created this monkey head. But for now, which is Susan, but for now, we don't need her anymore. So delete Susan. Okay, now our first goal is to start creating the head of Hornet. Finally, we can start creating Hornet. So there are multiple ways you can create the head of Hornet. Let's just zoom this out a bit. For example, working with edit mode, with faces, or using curves, which is what I will use in this video. So first I want to go into front view. In Blender, the default front view is Y here. And I want to go into snap into front view. To snap, you can, with different views, you can click on these. This is top view, this is front view, this is back view, and just like that. But remember, if you rotate it, you can still pan, but if you rotate it, it will disable. Okay. Now, first, we're going to use the method of creating a curve to create the head and then adding the geometry to it and then finally converting it to an actual mesh. To do it, just Shift A. Down here, you can see a curve right below the mesh. Hover over it, and I can see there's a bunch of type of curve. What is a curve? Well, it's really simple. It's just basically a curve, as it names, and there are handlers for you to change the shape of it. For example, I go into Bezier mode, click on this Bezier, which is going to see it is as a curve. And if I go to top view, okay, so now let's switch to edit mode. What is edit mode? Edit mode is basically a common mode used to edit things. For example, let's just hide this. You can click the eye icon to hide it. Add a cube. Now when I go into edit mode, you can see it's quite weird. Everything is orange as default. And also, let's delete these points. This is the edit mode, where probably one of the most common and important mode in the whole Blender. And this is where you'll spend most of your time with most projects. Edit mode basically just lets you edit more detailed and specifically the object. Okay, let's just delete this. Also, you can delete the object directly from the list, or after we talked before, delete it in the viewport is also possible. Okay, now let's go to Z, and down here you can switch to edit mode. You can press tab to switch from object to edit mode as a fast shortcut. Now you can see there are handlers here with different points. And you can grab these handlers by pressing click on them and then press G, and then they're basically just like that. But if you grab the end and the start of these, now if you press G, they rotate instead of moving. And with these, you can really basically create a wavy shape. So I'm just going to move this down, move this over here. And we have created a wavy shape, just like how we examples it. Also, a curve is not actually visible in the final render. So that means that you need to whether or add geometry to it, or do something to represent geometry in it, or else it won't appear and be visible in your final render. Okay, now Shift A, curve. We don't want a Bezier, we want a path, which, as I know, is basically just a straight curve. Let's go to front view, which is Y, snapping them in. Now go into edit mode, and you can see you can select the both ends. But now, if you can see, I want to select both of them. But when I select the other one, it just disabled the other one. So select one you want, hold Shift, and while holding Shift, click on this. After you're done, you can release the shift. Now, you can press G and Z. As we showed in the shortcuts, it just works basically like in the object mode. And now we can drag it up and down. You can see there's a new black outline appearing here. This is our actual curve. Then the orange line is just the place for our inputs, meaning that it helps that works better with. So you also can drag and select both ends, scale them in, select both bottoms, scale them out. I think I'm scaling this up a bit and then move this up. Good. But now, as I said before, this will not be displayed in the render, but I want this to be visible. So, and also add a bit of thickness to it because it's now just basically like a super even like a line, 2D line. So let's go back to front view. Go into the data properties over here. This is the properties panel, which is where you also work with, because there are many important things in here, as well like materials, modifiers, data, and many more that we'll use later on. Okay, so click on this data, which is this curve icon, and you can see here in geometry, open this up. Under bevel, if it's closed, you just open it up, and if you increase just back to object mode, if you increase the depth, or you can change the edit mode you want, increase the depth, you can see it's become thicker. And unlike the black outline, this will be visible in the render. So finally, we have something that is visible. And I kind of just want this to like depth to match this line, so something like this. Okay, so I finally end up with 0.25 meters. I think so. But you can change to whatever you want. Like how thick you want the head, the face will be. But now, if you actually, now there's one problem that I felt. It's not an actual problem, but you can see when you take a look at references about Hornet, this is kind of like a pointy tip instead of this big, bold line. So, how do we change it? Now, if I just select this and press S, like usual, it just brings them closer together, which is not what I want. I want to actually scaling these points down. So how do you do it? Well, simple. You just press Option, hold it, and then press S. And now you're just going to scale it in. And now you can see it kind of create that smoothly transition. But this is called taper. And now you read it out and see it. Also, if you change, although there may be a bit of problem, make sure your one is set to round. And also, if you change the extrude here, it will only extrude the face instead of increasing the thickness of the head. After we have the proper geometry, we can work with this better and know exactly what the final geometry will be. But also, if you zoom in here, you can see there's these holes. And we want to fill these holes out. So just press Fill Caps. And they're filled out. Let's go back to object mode. You can press Tab. Now we want to create the eye sockets. But before we do this, let's change this a bit. Because I noticed that in the side, Hornet is actually a bit lumpy out in her face and a bit flat in her back. So we're going to use sculpting for this. But what is sculpting? Well, sculpting is pretty much just like how people sculpt clay. It's basically just a way to change your object head, but in detail. And it's really good to create like faces and heads and realistic things. They can also be really useful to create these small details, but make the character more having characteristics and stylized. So let's get started. But before we go into sculpt mode, we have to convert this to a mesh. As I said before, a mesh is an object, which is basically a 3D object like this. If you go into, we just create a new cube to show you. I have a few things to show you in edit mode. First is that you can see they are all orange, which we haven't talked about really closely yet. And you can also see there are black outlines. If you deselect them, you can see there's black outline. Now, these black points, these corners or points, they're called vertices or vertex. I don't know, vertex, but I usually call them vertices. They are one point, and they can also be G to grab and move around. Command Z. Next is edges, which is basically just an edge, and you can also move them around, and really simple. For the face, and just select the face, and it's also a face, which you can move around, rotate. Oh, that's so bad. That's so bad. And this is basically the basic form to create a cube. And every mesh have a face, have edges, have face, and have vertices to be a complete mesh. Of course, Blender doesn't ban you to delete one of the vertices or edges or face. For example, if I delete this face, it still works, right? But to be a complete mesh, it needs 3 of them. Okay, now, why do I talk about this? Well, because sculpting uses faces and the actual mesh, the faces, to sculpt. It basically just moves the faces around, just like I showed you previously, but in a brush mode. So you can select a brush and with different textures, and you just move them. So, but if you go into edit mode, select the head or the curve NURBS Path here, go to edit mode, you can see that it doesn't have actual faces. It only has the input of the curve. And since also this is a curve, there are no sculpting options. Okay, so how do we convert it to mesh? I'm not talking. Finally, go to the point. Right click, and real simple, convert to, and just pick convert to mesh. There we go. Just convert it to mesh. Now the name doesn't change, but the icon does, because if you look, this is before icon, but I'm just going to redo it. That's now become a triangle, which is representing a mesh. And I'll go to edit mode. You can see the actual faces. And now you can just jump straight to sculpting. You can turn on sculpt mode using sculpting this, which takes time, or for me, or you can just directly jump to sculpt mode and the object mode to sculpt mode. And it works basically the same, others. And we have entered sculpt mode. And I'm just gonna, there are many brushes here with different textures and different shapes so you can choose from with different tools. For example, the clay strips. But before we start, you just hold and drag and paint on this, but you can see it kind of weirds. It's pointed, it's really pointy, it's squarey, it's not smooth at all. And also, the lines quite showing it not smooth. So how do we do it? First things first is that this is a shade smoothing automatically. So what shade smooth does is basically just a shade flat, which is the actual mesh itself, which is what it will be representing. But if you right click on shade smooth, it quite looks smooth, right? But if you zoom in, it is actually still jagged in the edges. And the reason is because it's just an illusion that Blender created, like changing the lights and different things like that, but not actually the mesh itself. Now, how is it that's good? Well, it's good when objects are far away like this, but you still want them to smooth. But if this object has a lot of face, which is what people call high poly, then it will cost a lot of storage and also slows down your computer a lot, especially in a low-end computers where it isn't as strong as a high-end computer. So, but in some circumstances, shade smooth is okay to use. But since we want a smoother result while sculpting, sculpting doesn't use the smoothness of this. It uses the actual mesh as I talked before, so we need to increase the face somehow. So let me introduce you to modifiers. This is my favorite feature in Blender. Modifiers is really like just features to add to your objects, to mesh, to adding sped up your workflow, or just doing something that you're too lazy to do. So many of the time, it helps you sped up your workflows like a ton. But you may not see the modifier tab, which is this wrench icon over here, in other objects like the camera or the light. The reason is because I think it's only visible in the mesh, which something has an actual mesh for it to work with. So to add a modifier, really simple, click on this. You can search it, or there are many options to choose from. But what we're looking for is subdivision surface. This icon with a square and turn into a circle. Click on it. Now it may take time to load, but when we first add it to it, you can see somehow it just increases the face. It still doesn't look actually smooth. This face still visible, but if I just disable this, you can see that it just like doubles, triples, quadruples, I don't know, the number of face. But unlike the shade smooth, which is just a trick, this is the actual mesh, which means that it is actually adding more faces to your model, to your mesh. So the more you increase this, the more result you get. For me, I'm just going to set to 3. You can set to cat mode Clark 2. And now you have it. And also, you can combine this with shade smooth. For example, I see here, I think this is enough geometry to work with sculpting, which is what I assume. But I still wanted to remove these visible squares, and I want to make it smooth. So you can combine both shade smooth and subdivision, right click, and shade smooth. Now it looks way better, and also it is possible to sculpt. So just go to sculpt mode, and now it's way, way, way smoother, and also it doesn't get jagged. Okay, now here's the fun part, sculpting. Now I know this is not fun, but in my opinion, but feel free to test different brushes and experiment with different brushes. Like for example, the clay here. Also, a few shortcuts and settings for the brush is the radius, which is basically the size of the brush. You can drag them up and down here, or hold F and then move in and out of your cursor, which is really useful. Like this, you can kind of see the clay strip effect as just amends it. For the strength, you can just drag in and out of this, which shows basically how powerful the effect is on your mesh. Now, I don't want anything that is quite complex in this, but I would love something like this, where you're going to wrap around and kind of create that texture you want, like that clay look. And this is also really useful if you want to create a clay look, like an uneven, unperfect look. For me, the reason I come here is just wanted to lump this out and flatten this bit. So let's find the tools. Okay, elastic grab. Click this and hold F to increase the radius first. This is basically like a tool, I must say. While other brush actually draws, like sculpt on it, it's just a tool to grab it out and drag it out. So it's not essentially fully a brush, I think, but it's more kind of like a tool. So also, if you notice, if you zoom in and out, the size actually changes. If you zoom in, you can see the size changes. So it's also a thingy that I want to talk about. But for now, let's just drag this out a bit. Increase the scale up. Also mirror in the y-axis, I think. No, the x-axis, which is basically just represent whatever this do on the other opposite side. Okay, so just turn off this y. Also want to decrease its strength, but increase. Like this, kind of like cranks a bit. This looks a bit more stylized, and I also really love it. Okay, that's the main part, which is creating the eye sockets, and also the main part I want to talk about modifiers. So, to create the eye sockets, they are basically really simple, like a hole in your eye, in the Hornet head. And to do that, we're going to use the Boolean modifier. I'm going to show you really how and why I use Boolean. So first, before we do anything, let's just add a modifier. Go to generate and just add a auto-generate and just add a Boolean modifier, which should be this icon. And it does nothing. Literally nothing. The reason why, let's just shapefile this. Make sure you shapefile it because I found out there's some problem with the Boolean if you shape smooth it. So just increase this to like 4. Yeah, pretty good. Okay, so now nothing happens because literally we have nothing to Boolean with. So just create Shift A, create a new UV sphere based on the shape you want your eye to be. For example, a square eye. I don't know why everyone would ever put a square eye. For example, a robot. It's also really useful. So I'm going to rotate this, R to rotate it. And also I'm snapping in this view, so it will automatically R and snapping and locking in the y-axis. So when you're snapping, it will depend on what you're snapping. I just move this over here, going to the side view, and I just want to kind of move it over here. This looks terrible. But now, make sure you select the head, not the eye. The base we use to create the eye. make sure you apply the boolean to the head. And I just use this eyedropper or this search thingy here. Eyedropper, and I drop it. It takes like a few times. But now, nothing happens. The reason is because you haven't had this sphere. So you hide. Cool. We create an eye socket. And also, if yours doesn't work like mine, make sure your boolean is set to difference. And how it actually works is take the overlapping part of the object that you selected to the object that you add the boolean in, and it's kind of like deleting the geometry in that part. Like that, just basically like that. And now, the real reason why I choose boolean is that, this is really cool, I'm just going to show you. You can add another modifier to the object that you used to create the boolean itself. Now I want to create another eye, so use generate and mirror modifier. Now there should be problems. One is that yours may be flickering like this, and number two is that it wasn't appearing on the opposite side, like how the sculpting works. The reason for this flickering is because they are overlapping to exact each other, and Blender doesn't even know what to render it first and what to render it back, so you just basically flick around and each time it changes. Next, the reason why it isn't in the opposite direction is because Blender work, you have to apply the location. Now one reason why you have to apply the location is that mainly the location will be set in the center of the object. Let's just quickly disable this, so click on this. This. It's set in the middle, but if you apply, it will set in the origin point of your current project, or this center point here, which if it is in the middle of your object, then it will literally just spawn right in your object. But if it's not in the center, for example in the bottom, it will have like this symmetry point for it to work with and spawn the opposite. And if you ever used symmetry before, you understand what it does. They're pretty common in our softwares, and also one of the examples is Procreate, which is the software I use. So let's just remove this first. Mine is a bit laggy. Control A and just apply our transform. Now if you add a new mirror modifier again, it works. Yay, because it set the orange point here of your mesh, which is this point, to the origin, the center, which now it works. Make sure you're set to X, so it looks like this. And now, here's the thing I talk about. If you don't have the sphere, it creates 2 points. And now, I can want to add for example, this looks quite lumpy, this looks quite square, so I can add a subdivision surface. So, subdivision surface. And I just increase this subdivision surface. Although I think 2 is only what we need. And now you hide this, it becomes smooth. Yay. Now, before we do anything, I want to talk about a few things about applying modifiers. Click select this. If you go into your edit mode, you can see here that even though the modifier looks like it added a lot of face, the number of face in the actual edit is still the same. So, sometimes the render will not render the exact modifiers and will apply the same, because if you haven't applied a modifier yet, this is just like a temporary preview of what will happen after you apply the modifier. So you can change the settings. But if you already applied it before, you cannot change the settings. So we're going to apply the mirror first, start from the start. And also apply the subdivision. Let's just apply this. No, apply this first. apply this too, which actually get into the geometry. And now we don't need the sphere anymore. So let's delete it, and now it has been registered in the geometry. Now I only want to rename this something clear instead of NURBS Path, because one thing, it isn't a curve anymore, and also it doesn't make sense because this is a head, clearly a head. So let's just double click this. Usually I'll just double click it and rename it to head. Cool. Congratulations, we have created a head for Hornet. With proper eye sockets for her, sculpting, and also we learned about curves today with modifiers too, which is a really important thing. So get ready for the next episode. Thank you for watching. Goodbye, see you in the next tutorial, or maybe the next video. Goodbye, see you again. Thank you for watching. Make sure you hit the subscribe, notification bell, and the like button. Share it. Thank you.